Hi.
Ah,
It worked. Fabulous.
yes.
Uh,
Nice.
uh,
Okay.
Welcome, Kathleen. Before we get started, I just have a few acknowledgments to make. Just a reminder to everyone that we do these Busch Hall Conversations once a month, and that this is a virtual space designed to reimagine art and identity through the lens of the Busch-Reisinger Museum, which is one of the institutions that comprise the Harvard Art Museums. And I'm very grateful to our German friends of the Busch-Reisinger Museum who support this conversation series and so much of what we do at the museum. I would also like to acknowledge that although I am actually in Berlin right now, just like Kathleen, Harvard University and the Harvard Art Museums are located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. So I'm very pleased to welcome you, Kathleen, to Busch Hall. For those of you who don't know Kathleen yet, she is the recently appointed director of the Georg Kolbe Museum here in Berlin and was formerly the curator of contemporary art at the Albertinum in Dresden, which is where we met for the first time just a few years ago, or maybe even just a year
Yeah.
ago. Um, and I want to just kick it off by really turning it over to you, Kathleen, because I would love for you to give our audience a sense of an essay that you wrote, which was actually the first work that I read of yours or came across of yours. It was an essay you wrote in 2019 called "Can the Artists Help Survive?" And it's really a resume of post-unification reception and exhibition of art made in the former German Democratic Republic, but it's also deeply personal, which I think is really what struck me at the time. So I was hoping you could just say a bit more about that essay and also maybe why you decided to also put your own personal story out there.
Okay. Yes, I will. Thank you also for this invitation. I'm very excited. This is my first Instagram Live, so let's see how that goes. But I'm excited to be in conversation with you again, Lynette, because I just remember our last meeting as a really wonderful exchange where we were basically discussing topics all over the place, but always somehow coming back to also the status of art made in Germany over the centuries somehow. And yeah, so you mentioned this article that I sent to you, then Can the Artist Help Survive? I was invited by the Hungarian magazine, it's an online publication, Mesosfera, to contribute to their themed issues. And the topic was very open, but they wanted me to somehow, yeah, think about the status of post reunification art in Germany. And there was also an incident happening at the Albertinum and at the state collections in Dresden in 2017 and 18. Which very much like triggered all of what was pouring out and was coming out in this essay, because the essay is a work of autofiction, I would say. As a writer, I'm very interested in this format of autofiction. So how to bring a personal strain somehow into also writing and into art theoretical writing.
Mm-hmm.
Especially today, I think this is also important somehow to take a position and to position yourself as an art historian, as a writer, as a theorist, just as you did now with your introduction, to recognize also the context and the circumstances that we are working within and upon, and also, of course, the background that we are like coming from in order
Yeah.
to fulfill this. And because I'm not a fan of like this like very neutral position of art historical writings that is actually still taught in
Mm.
academies. And so
It's one
this,
of the, actually, I don't want to
mhm.
interrupt you, Kathleen, but it's one of the reasons actually in this series, I've often asked, Germanists, art historians who are working on German art, why? How did they get there? What was the impulse, that actually led them to do this work? And it's been very revealing, not just about who is doing this work today, but also the many different ways and the many different also historical or educational situations that they were in that kind of led them to focus on Germany. And so, I mean, obviously you are German, so maybe it's not so surprising, but many Germans choose to focus on many other things. And in fact, you wrote your dissertation on African American art. So, you could have gone in many different directions, in thinking about this essay. So anyway, to get back to it, please continue.
Yeah, and so the essay also starts like with a personal visit to an exhibition by Henrike Naumann here in Berlin, and then basically takes on the situation in Dresden, and actually the situation which was always very problematic for me living in Berlin somehow to also understand going back and forth, this like back and forth movement, especially between a very cosmopolitan city like Berlin to a place which is of course full of art, but at the same time also trying somehow to cling to certain narratives of art. And so this like autofictional move somehow helped me also to put all of this in, which of course is also a highly problematic political situation within Germany, which is oftentimes not recognized.
Can you
in West
just give
Germany.
us the broad strokes of that, because we have an audience that might not be
yes,
as
yeah. So also like maybe I can just just summarize the essay a little bit, because that basically is also then the political situation that I try to work through, which was a very vivid presence of right-wing parties, of right-wing activists coming together, and basically also trying to influence the public discourse in East Germany, what they are still doing today. So it is very hard to somehow like get into this without because like on the one hand, obviously you have to recognize everything that has happened to East Germany after the fall of the wall, which is also obviously a history of regret and of not being recognized, also from a West German narrative. On the other hand, it is also a history of radicalization from the right wing, which, for example, for West Germans is not that clear or not that present. And so for everyone being present, living in East Germany, growing up in East Germany after 1990, the right-wing presence was just something that you had to deal with daily. And you also had to somehow position yourself towards this. And I was also in the essay looking at how this takes over art historical cultural discourses very like quickly, and how also right-wing parties are looking into those unresolved issues between West and East German art history during the Cold War, and try to somehow generate fodder for their populist meaning making. And and so this the essay basically started then about this incident in the Albertinum, which I've mentioned, which I'm coming back to now, which was basically an East German art historian who has been also very influential in bringing East German art history also to the fore. Was somehow claiming that the Albertinum of the Dresden State Art Collections was not showing enough art made in East Germany, and it was hiding it, which was not the truth at all. But this triggered then a chain of accusations also towards the director of the museum and towards the museum in general.
And you were already working at the Albertinum at that time.
I was working at the Albertinum at that time, and then as a reaction also from the side of the museum, Hilke Wagner, the director, decided to organize a large-scale discussion forum, which in weekly events was looking on the one hand at like the art of East Germany from our collection. Then we were inviting international scholars also to look at art from made in East Germany during that time from an international perspective. But of course, also being able to also speak German, which is also another very important factor for discussions in Dresden, of course, because we want to be inclusive. And not many people also from older generations do speak English as their second language. And the third format in this discussion series were public forums about like very broad topics. And in those public forums, a lot of very sensitive issues were raised, and it was like it was heated debates going on, which were carrying on not very much. They were not stuck in the art historical discourse, but were like right away somehow dragged into like societal discourses. Which was sometimes hard, also to bring this back to art, and also to use this and to use those formats to push also the discourse on art made in East Germany forward.
Yeah, and I think that was what was so. I mean, there were many striking things about the essay, but that you basically are asking, what is the role of art? On the one hand, there was an audience in Dresden that wanted to see works that they loved and that were, very popular in the, sort of popular imagination of the GDR. And at the same time, the museum and curators and art historians are trying to also look to other strains of art making, the whole sort of debate around sort of what's official, was official and what was unofficial and these kinds of things. And so trying to kind of bring those two desires in some way sort of together in the space of the museum. And I just thought it was so striking to me that the museum became the space for this conversation that, it seems like really hadn't been had in many sort of open public ways, in the last 30 years. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm seeing that obviously from my perspective, but I thought, it's really the ways in which, you, as a curator, right, or you're trying to bring it back to the art, and at the same time, it's so highly loaded. And you very rightly point out that, for many of the discussions around art made in East Germany, there was this assumption that art made in West Germany was not in support of certain dogmas or was not in somehow, also. So I do think, this sort of increasing nuance around this subject is just really, it's interesting. Almost like you have to go through the history of this sort of exhibition, reception, in order to even explain how we are where we are now.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's also very important to point out those different forums for those discussions, because often in like art historical texts or theory or text of theory, this very practical component of the museum and of like where people encounter art is often forgotten or somehow not discussed, even though this is the main space where people can see art and where people are also confronted with art. And of course, as a museum, it's on the one hand, of course, important to show art history and to show or also to question art history. This is actually the task of a museum. In some way to educate about discourses of art history, at the same time also putting them into context with other discourses. And so also enabling people to encounter or re-encounter again and again certain works with like maybe other also circumstances that they're having in their like personal lives, but also what is happening politically. How artworks also live through different eras also of time. This is something that is like that the museum is like perfect for, because of course a work that was made 100 years ago and then exhibited continuously throughout different periods, different political systems, is always something that is looked at or is contextualized in completely different ways. And as a museum, we want to, of course, make that visible to people. At the same time, also opening through those discussions to other topics, to new art, to contemporary art that is just as older art is looking at their times and is confronting basically their contemporary moment.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I guess, you know, the title, you know, Can the Artist Help Survive? And the fact that you start with Henrika Naumann's work, who is a young artist who, you know, was born and grew up in the GDR, and for, you know, just a few years really until reunification, and then also, you know, is tracking the neo-national, you know, discourse that you were describing at the outset. And so I guess that would be sort of my next question is, you know, obviously, you know, we have some of these fascinating artists now who are really actually digging into those topics and also thinking about the art of the art that was made in the GDR, that and combining, I mean, she even combines the work of her grandfather in her own, which you describe in the essay. So in some ways, I'd like to know, you know, we're in a different moment now than we were in January 2019, when you first wrote the essay. How would you describe where we are now in thinking around this, or even what you see in the contemporary art scene? Do you see, you know, more artists, younger artists embracing these issues, tackling these issues?
Yeah, I think it's actually in the just in the past couple of years, a lot has happened for also artists looking at topics of East German art or East Germany in general. Because this has become a topic in German society, also through those radicalizations that were going on. And of course, with every election, you can see the line again that divided East and West Germany, because the AfD, so the right-wing party in Germany, has a very high percentage of supporters in the East, much more than in the West. So you can still see those old fault lines being projected basically on the election results screen. And also in the pandemic, but also definitely in the last year with the war that is happening in Ukraine.
Yeah.
That those topics, like they're treated very differently still in East and West Germany, and so artists have a very rich, unfortunately, very rich environment and very rich context that come from this situation. And I think there is somehow also through exhibitions, through discussions also that happened over the past 5 years, maybe, a new sensibility also for those stories, and definitely we are looking much further at the moment also. So what you can see happening now, for example, is a very heightened interest also in the relations, for example, of the GDR and countries from the global South. And also artists looking at those topics, producing new artworks, also artists who themselves might have a history also with relations that the GDR made and forged on the political field and cultural field with countries from the global south. And so this is really exciting. It's a really exciting moment, actually, because it's a revisiting of art from the GDR with a complete different like under a complete different lens and with somehow new glasses and by a new generation.
Yeah, and I mean, they're very productive and very exciting new glasses. I mean, I sort of feel like, you know, when I visited and I should say that you are integral to these discussions, which is why, you know, also the title of our conversation today, East German Internationalism, because you did an exhibition at the Albertinum called Revolutionary Romances, which was actually sort of just a prelude to a larger project. Maybe you could say a little bit more about where that work has taken you, and sort of thinking about reorienting ourselves away from just thinking about, you know, the West or West Germany as the sort of dialogue that we can view this period of German art through.
Yeah, I think this is also something that that I was trying to like unpack through two larger exhibition and research projects. So this idea that somehow like art in East Germany or art in the GDR was like solely looking, being fixated like somehow on West Germany. Which, of course, in terms is true. Like, I think both sides were absolutely fixed on each other, like during the Cold War, obviously. But what was happening also in East Germany and in the GDR, I should say, in terms of connections, of looking at an art or wanting to somehow find different connections. Something that is like very exciting to look at, because it has not been looked at like in depth, I think, over the past decades. And so this project that you mentioned that I'm working on with my colleague Matthias Wagner, or I used to work on, now Matthias has taken over because I'm at the Kolbe Museum now.
We'll get there. We're on our way.
Well, it's an exhibition. Or it's a research and exhibition project, because it's a long-term project, because something like this you cannot just whip up in a year. It's called Revolutionary Romances, Transcultural Art Histories in the GDR. And so Matthias and I were able to organize a research exhibition, which you saw when you were visiting Dresden last year. And this research exhibition somehow was, for us, also a testing ground for this idea, because we were developing a project that is looking at the collection also of the state art collections, because I think this is very important, working in a museum with a collection, to not just push in new art and new exhibitions all the time, but also to critically revisit your own collection and then see what could be interesting also, for example, for contemporary artists to look at and maybe find new angles towards it.
I could
also
not
now.
agree more.
Yeah,
that's the best thing about having a collection.
Yes, and also with this collection, because and you mentioned this, so my scholarly background is Black art, is African American art. I look at the collection with a very different eye, and as soon as I see something that is familiar, it's familiar to me, but might not be familiar to also scholars of this particular context of art from the GDR. And this is when I started to somehow think this could be something where we could combine also a post-socialist and also a post-colonial sensibility, and also to go back like through the collection and through the history also that those objects took, which are in the collection. and also the motivations, like why are they there? Why did East German painters paint the guest students, for example, in like a very broad way? So we have a lot of portraits also of foreign students, for example, in the collection, through which you can actually tell the history of Dresden painting, because they were made by everyone who was influential also in the Dresden Painting Academy. And so this was the initial idea, to like look at this, to invite contemporary artists also to think with us through what we have and what we cannot show or don't show often enough. So, for example,
that will culminate when?
Yeah, so the project is a multi-part project with this research exhibition, which happened last year, and two conferences that also happened last year. So one happened in June, which we were able to co-organize with the Technical University in Dresden, which was called the Global GDR, and was focusing solely on the connections of the GDR to different countries of the Global South. And it was organized by Kerstin Schankweiler at the TU Dresden. And she also has another project, which I would definitely recommend everyone to look at. It's called Art in Networks. They have a fantastic website. She gathered a team of amazing young scholars around her. And throughout the last year, they were doing interviews with people who were actually foreign art students in the GDR, or who were artists in the GDR, visiting Cuba, visiting Vietnam, also exhibition organizers working also at those exhibitions that the GDR, like through political motivations, were bringing in from different backgrounds. So it's a very rich resource of course, of oral history and of witnesses from that time.
Well, we'll link to that. We'll link to that, yes, on the Instagram, certainly, so that if anyone wants to, yes, find that easily. And we're also going to link to your essay that we mentioned at the outset, so that everyone can read that. And it's in English. So that's, yes, that's always good.
Yes. And also the second conference was also really amazing, because we widened this to Eastern Europe. So not just GDR relations, but then Eastern European relations also. But we were looking also at artists so that brings us somehow back also to the beginning of the talk, to artists from Western contexts, who choose to enter Eastern contexts. So you have like the different way, because like our main idea is always that artists from the Eastern Bloc were like desperately trying to escape, whereas artists who were also marginalized in the West were finding platforms in Eastern and in socialist contexts for their art, which they were not finding in their respective countries. So, for example, look, we're coming back also somehow to what you've mentioned. I have a very keen interest also in the artist Charles White, who was an African American painter and someone who drew like very intricate portraits of African American life throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And he was a very renowned figure in the GDR. So his first catalog monograph was published in the GDR in Dresden in the early 50s. So something that he would not have been able to do in the US at that time. And he was also exhibited repeatedly in the GDR. He was visiting Berlin. He was visiting Dresden throughout the 70s. So all of those connections are like highly interesting, because now we're thinking about of those figures as figures who were on the margin during that time. But in the GDR, he was not at the margin at all. He was like in the middle of a very official art system. And he was, he was showered also with awards during that time. So those
So Charles White, but you've also worked
yeah.
on Angela Davis and others. And you know, that was actually a major, incredible exhibition that you did at the Albertinum. And I feel like these are stories. I mean, these are not the stories that certainly I think Americans associate with American figures and the German Democratic Republic. I mean, if at all, it's kind of and you know, they just haven't been told.
Yes, and so this project that that basically came before also the revolutionary romances research was the exhibition on Angela Davis. It was called 1 Million Roses for Angela Davis, and it was an exhibition that I put together. Yeah, also, I mean, it's like it's all like very private things that come in somehow in exhibition making, of course. So while I was at, UC Santa Cruz for my PhD about 10 years ago, I told my mother that Angela Davis was teaching at UC Santa Cruz, and she was like overjoyed and very excited about this. And she's like, "Oh my God, Angela Davis, you have to take a photo with her." And so I was like, this is the last thing I want, like to take a photo with Angela Davis. Actually, I would want to speak to her and, you know, exchange and read and discuss. And so for me, that was very interesting to think about this, that like there is a generation in the GDR which vividly remembers Angela Davis, but also remembers her as an image. And then does not know or like didn't follow up also what she also then became after her fame in the GDR in the early 70s. And so for us scholars, for artists, contemporary artists also, Angela Davis is a very important figure because she's portrayed in many artists' works, and a lot of artists are referring to her writing and to also her very important role also as an intersectional scholar. And so I wanted to bring those two sides together. So this idea of her only being an image somehow circulating also in, on the one hand, of course, revolutionary discourses of the left now, and also throughout the past decades. At the same time, being this heroine of the Eastern Bloc, because she was supported throughout her trial by the Eastern Bloc in a very substantial way. And then when she was visiting the Eastern Bloc afterwards, she was welcomed like in just an amazing way as like this folk heroine somehow. And so for me, it's always important with those types of exhibitions that are looking at transgenerational influences, that the contemporary artists somehow look at a historical context and extract also what is important for our current moment from that. And so for the 1 Million Roses for Angela Davis exhibition, it was a mix. It was a mix of also portraits, so very official oil paintings made of her by East German painters. So also something that no one knows about in the US. And for me, it was also fascinating to look at those images, especially when you think about the rise of or this, you know, the art market rise maybe also of Black figurative painting just in the past 5 years. And to think about then East German painters being very much invested in the 70s to portray Angela Davis, so someone they've never encountered, but just working also from images somehow, and what this meant for them, and this iconography that stems from that.
Well, it's fascinating, and I encourage everyone to to check out the catalog and the description. Oh, she's got it. She's got it. And also,
Yeah, so
we're going to have
the catalog is still available. You
yes,
can buy that.
check it out, and also, and we're going to have to sort of skip ahead because we're pretty much out of time because you've had so many fascinating projects recently, but you do also have a show up now at the Wende Museum on Ruth Wolf-Rehfeld, which is again another fantastic contribution to the scholarship. But I want to now skip to your newest position as the director of the Kolbe Museum, and what is in store for us there, Kathleen?
Yeah, so the exhibition at the Wende Museum in Los Angeles is still up, so people can still see it. It's, I think, one of my personal favorite projects. Also, again, I invited a contemporary artist, David Horowitz, from Los Angeles, also to be in conversation with the male art artist, Ruth Wolf-Rehfeld. And so we've put together a very dialogical exhibition there, which also exists as a book.
Also has a beautiful
books. Yeah. And so again, here also David was taking on this legacy and extending this legacy of mail art. So something that people also don't expect coming out of East Germany. And Ruth Wolf-Rehfeld and her late husband, Robert Rehfeld, were basically the center of the East German mail art scene. And we're corresponding over decades also with large parts of the world. Yeah, so this is something that's up at the Wende Museum, which was my actually last project for the Albertinum. And so I was very lucky to somehow conclude this part at the Albertinum of my curatorship with this lovely project by David Horowitz and Ruth Wolf-Rehfeld, and bring it to the US especially. So yes, at the Kolbe Museum, of course, I'm in a completely new context for me. So
a surprising context, honestly. I was a little surprised, which is why I'm going to, while we have you here, ask, why Kolbe? I mean, tell us, because, I think Kolbe, I know you also have contemporary projects that have been a part of that museum for some time, which has been very exciting. But Kolbe as a figure, how will he play into your work, and how you think about even the role of museums to go to a monographic. I know it's not strictly monographic in its programming, but it is a monographic museum.
It is a monographic museum. So it is a very small museum, which is located at the very western edge of Berlin, so close to the Olympic Stadium. Georg Kolbe is a fascinating figure for me at the moment. So he is, or he was the most successful sculptor, figurative sculptor of the first part of the 20th century. He has
also very well represented in the Busch-Reisinger Museum.
Yes, which is great, actually. So he was working, on this idea of figuration in sculpture for decades, and basically laid the ground also from this jump from the academy, from academic sculpturing somehow to a more modern approach also to sculpture. And for me, of course, this idea of figuration is something that is, of course, very important for art from the GDR, because the whole East German art historical trajectory, is one that is looking at figuration and at the depiction of the human body. For me, it was very great to see my former colleague Astrid Nielsen and Bertram Kaschek, the photographer, curator of the Cabinet of Prints and Drawing at that time, bring together a very small show, which was photographs of the East German photographer Christian Borchert, who was invited in the late 80s to go on a trip in West Germany to look at Kolbe and to look at sculptures from Kolbe in the public realm, but also to visit the museum. So there was this really amazing treasure trove that you find of Borchert's view on Kolbe. So for me, it's also like fascinating, interesting to see how like somehow the GDR at that time giving Christian Borchert also this nomination to go and take those pictures because they wanted to publish something, and why, and so this, I think this context is something that I'm very interested in. Also this revisiting. At the same time, of course, and I mentioned this, the museum is close to the Olympic Stadium, and Kolbe was also contributing sculptures for the Olympic Stadium, which famously was erected to host the Olympic Games of 1936, and of course in 1936. There was one athlete who basically won all gold medals, who was Jesse Owens.
Wonderful.
So the idea also about the sculptures that were made of athletic bodies, and that were decorating, were welcoming the visitors to the Olympic Games, were of course white bodies, and it was that was the idea of heroic athletes. But who in the end took home the wins was another body, was an African-American athlete. So those are somehow the ways that I'm wiggling myself into this context, and for me also to understand the history of figurative sculpture in those contrasts. And
yes.
And
well,
also,
you said. I was going to say, you said before to go back into the collection and really sort of think, again, through the lenses that we have today, can be an incredibly, productive exercise. And I'm sure that you will open our eyes to many things, and also to to some of the challenges of dealing with Kolbe's work, given his success, also throughout the Nazi period, and I think that's your critical eye is one that I trust very much, and I look forward to seeing what you do. I'm so sorry that we have to wrap up, because just like when we met in person, I feel like I could just talk to you all day. But I think we should wrap it up, Kathleen, and everyone has now had an incredible introduction to your work and to you, and should definitely check out all of the various projects you have going on right now, and also the Georg Kolbe Museum next time anyone might be in Berlin, including myself. So
yes, please. Yes, and of course the Kolbe Museum does not show only historical art, but has also a very strong emphasis on contemporary art and contemporary exhibitions. And so this is also something that I would invite people to, just check out. And thank you very much also for having me.
Oh, thanks.
Really
thanks for agreeing to do this. And you did very well for your first Instagram Live.
Great.
We wouldn't have known. All right. Thanks. Take care, Kathleen.
Take care. Bye-bye.